The bank smelled like arrogance and polished floors, a sterile scent that choked the air. For Clara Jackson, 78 years old and trembling with rage, it was the smell of a fight she hadn't asked for. She stood at the counter, her worn purse clutched tightly, her knuckles pale against the dark skin of her hands. The teller, a young man with a name tag reading Brad, sneered as he slid her ID back across the counter. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we can't process this. Your account's flagged. Again." His tone dripped with condescension, loud enough for the line of customers behind her to shift uncomfortably. Clara's heart thudded, not from fear but from the weight of a lifetime spent proving herself in rooms like this. "I've been banking here for 40 years, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I know my account is fine. Check it again." Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto Brad's, but he didn't budge. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms with a smirk that made Clara's blood boil. 40 years, huh?" Brad said, his voice carrying a mocking lilt. "Maybe it's time to take your business elsewhere, ma'am. We don't have time for mistakes." The word hung in the air, a thinly veiled jab at her identity, her presence, her very existence in this pristine, glass-walled institution. The other customers, mostly white, mostly silent, averted their gazes, but Clara felt their judgment like a physical weight. She straightened, her spine rigid despite the ache in her joints. "You're not listening," she said, her voice rising now, cutting through the hum of the bank. "I'm not leaving until you fix this. I know my rights." Her words were a challenge, a spark in a room full of kindling. The lobby grew quieter, the air taut with anticipation. A few customers whispered, their words too soft to catch but heavy with disdain. Clara didn't care. She'd faced worse than whispers. Behind the counter, the bank manager, a middle-aged woman named Karen with a tight bun and an even tighter smile, emerged from her office. Her heels clicked authoritatively as she approached, her eyes scanning Clara like she was a problem to be solved. "Is there an issue here?" Karen asked, her voice syrupy but sharp, like a blade dipped in honey. Clara didn't flinch. "The issue is your teller refusing to do his job. My account is in order, and I'm tired of being treated like I don't belong here." Karen's smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Jackson, I understand you're upset, but we have protocols. If your account is flagged, there's nothing we can do until it's cleared. Perhaps you should come back another day." Her tone was final, dismissive, as if Clara were a child being sent to bed without supper. The words hit Clara like a slap, but she stood her ground. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice low and fierce. "You don't get to push me out because you think I don't fit your idea of a customer." The accusation hung in the air, raw and undeniable. Karen's smile faltered, just for a moment, before she recovered, her face hardening. "Mrs. Jackson, please lower your voice," Karen said, her tone now openly hostile. "You're causing a scene, and we have other customers to serve. If you don't leave, I'll have to call security." The threat was a match to gasoline. Clara's eyes blazed, her hands tightening on her purse. "Call them," she said, her voice steady as stone. "Let them drag an old woman out for asking to be treated like a human being. See how that looks." The lobby was a pressure cooker now, the tension thick enough to choke on. Customers shifted, some pulling out phones, others murmuring in low tones. Brad leaned forward, his smirk replaced by a nervous glance at Karen. The manager's face was a mask of control, but her hands betrayed her, fidgeting with a pen as she weighed her next move. Then the glass doors swung open. The man who entered was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that hugged his frame like it was tailored for a king. His presence was a force, quiet but undeniable, like a storm gathering on the horizon. His dark skin gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his eyes sharp, intelligent, and burning with something unspoken scanned the room before landing on Clara. The lobby seemed to hold its breath as he strode forward, his polished shoes silent on the marble floor. "Mom," he said, his voice low but resonant, cutting through the tension like a blade. Every head turned. Clara's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of relief, before she turned back to Karen, her defiance unwavering. Karen's face drained of color. "Sir, this is a private matter," she stammered, her voice losing its edge. "We're handling it." The man Malcolm Jackson, Clara's son, didn't acknowledge her. He stepped closer to the counter, his presence commanding the room without effort. "Handling it?" he repeated, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Is that what you call humiliating my mother in front of a crowd?" Karen opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes darting between Malcolm and Clara. Brad shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado gone. The customers were no longer whispering. They were staring, phones still in hand, capturing every second of the unfolding drama. "I'm Malcolm Jackson," he said, his voice steady, each word deliberate. "And I own this bank." The words landed like a thunderclap. Karen's face went from pale to ghostly, her pen slipping from her fingers to clatter on the counter. Brad froze, his eyes wide with panic. The customers gasped, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck the air from the room. Clara stood taller, her gaze never leaving Karen's, a quiet triumph in her eyes. Malcolm stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You have 10 seconds to explain why my mother, a customer for 40 years, is being treated like a criminal in my bank." Karen's mouth worked soundlessly, her composure shattered. "Mr. Jackson, too didn't know." "You didn't know?" Malcolm cut her off, his voice sharp now, slicing through her excuses. "You didn't know that every customer deserves respect? That my mother, who's been coming here longer than you've been alive, deserves better than your condescension." Clara watched her son, her heart swelling with pride but also with pain. She'd raised him to be strong, to fight for what was right, but she hadn't wanted this moment to come. Not like this, not with her at the center of a spectacle, her dignity laid bare for strangers to gawk at. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Jackson," Karen said, her voice trembling now. "It was a misunderstanding. We'll fix it immediately." Malcolm didn't respond. He turned to Clara, his eyes softening. "Mom, are you okay?" Clara nodded, her throat tight. "I'm fine, Malcolm. Just tired of this nonsense." He placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent promise that this wasn't over. Then he turned back to Karen, his voice cold. "You'll fix it now, and then we're going to have a long conversation about how this bank operates." The lobby was silent now, the tension replaced by a stunned awe. Customers exchanged glances, some ashamed, others intrigued. Brad busied himself with papers, avoiding eye contact. Karen, still pale, nodded quickly and gestured to the teller to pull up Clara's account. As the keys clacked and the screen flickered, Clara felt the weight of the moment settle over her. This wasn't just about her account. It was about every time she'd been dismissed, every sideways glance, every assumption that she didn't belong. It was about the world she'd fought to change, the world her son was still fighting for. Malcolm stood beside her, his presence a shield, but Clara knew this wasn't his victory alone. It was hers, too. She'd stood her ground, just as she always had. And now, with her son at her side, she felt something she hadn't in years. The power to demand better. The screen flashed, and Brad's voice was barely a whisper. "The account's clear, ma'am. I'm sorry for the confusion." Clara didn't smile. She didn't nod. She looked at him, then at Karen, her gaze unwavering. "It's not about the account," she said softly. "It's about respect." The words hung in the air, a challenge and a truth. Malcolm squeezed her shoulder, his eyes proud. Karen looked away, her face a mask of shame. The customers, still watching, began to disperse, some shaking their heads, others whispering about what they just witnessed. But Clara wasn't done. She turned to Malcolm, her voice low but firm. "This bank is yours, but it's mine too. I've been here longer than any of them. Make sure they remember that." Malcolm nodded, a promise in his eyes. "They will, Mom. They will." The lobby began to hum again, the tension easing but not forgotten. Clara adjusted her purse, her hands steady now, and walked toward the door with Malcolm at her side. The glass reflected their figures, a mother and son, unbroken and unbowed. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Clara knew that, and so did Malcolm. The bank might be his, but the world outside was still a battlefield. And they were ready for it. As Clara and Malcolm stepped out of the bank, the midday sun hit them like a wave, warm but unyielding. The glass doors hissed shut behind them, muffling the hum of the lobby, but the weight of what had just happened clung to them both. Clara's steps were measured, her purse still clutched tightly, as if letting go might unravel the strength she'd summoned. Malcolm walked beside her, his suit jacket unbuttoned now, his face a mix of pride and fury. The street outside buzzed with life cars honking, pedestrians weaving through the crowd, but for a moment, it was just the two of them, tethered by a shared history and a shared fight. Malcolm glanced at his mother, his voice soft but urgent. "You didn't have to go through that alone, Mom. Why didn't you call me?" Clara's lips curved into a faint smile, tinged with exhaustion. "I've been fighting battles like this since before you were born, Malcolm. I don't need you to save me every time." Her words were gentle but firm, a reminder of the resilience that had carried her through decades of slights, dismissals, and outright hostility. Malcolm nodded, respecting her strength but hating that she still had to use it. They reached his car, a sleek black sedan parked just across the street. As Malcolm opened the passenger door for her, Clara paused, her eyes scanning the city skyline. "This bank," she said, her voice low. "It's yours now, but it's not just about you. It's about every person who walks through those doors and gets treated like they're less than human." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "I know, Mom. I'm going to fix this, starting today." Inside the bank, the air was still thick with unease. Karen stood behind the counter, her face flushed as she barked orders at Brad, who was frantically typing, trying to make himself invisible. The other tellers exchanged nervous glances, their usual efficiency replaced by a cautious slowness. The customers who had witnessed the confrontation were gone, but their whispers had already spread, rippling through social media and group chats. By noon, Bank Injustice was trending on X, with videos of Clara's stand and Malcolm's entrance racking up thousands of views. Back in Malcolm's office, a corner suite on the top floor of the bank's headquarters, the mood was different. The room was all glass and steel, a testament to his success, but it felt cold to Clara as she settled into a leather chair. Malcolm paced, his phone buzzing with notifications he ignored. "Karen's been with the bank for 15 years, he said, more to himself than to Clara. "She's good at her job, but this is unacceptable." Clara leaned forward, her hands folded in her lap. "It's not just Karen, Malcolm. It's the whole system. The way they look at people like me, like yous, and decide we don't belong. You can fire her, but that won't fix the problem." Malcolm stopped pacing, his eyes meeting hers. "What do you want me to do, Mom? I can't change the world overnight." No, Clara agreed, her voice steady. But you can start here. You can make this bank a place where people are seen, not judged. Malcolm nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. He'd built his empire from nothing, a black man rising to the top in a world that rarely made room for him. He'd bought this bank 2 years ago, a quiet acquisition that had shocked the industry. But owning it wasn't enough. Clara was right, it had to mean something more. By the next morning, Malcolm had called an emergency meeting with the bank's leadership team. The conference room was packed, every chair filled with managers and executives, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Karen sat near the end of the table, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes avoiding Malcolm's. He stood at the head of the room, his presence commanding silence without effort. Yesterday, he began, his voice calm but unyielding. My mother was humiliated in one of our branches. She was treated like she didn't belong, like her 40 years as a customer meant nothing. And I want to know why. The room was silent, the air heavy with guilt and defensiveness. Karen shifted in her seat, her face pale. Malcolm continued, his gaze sweeping the table. This isn't just about one incident. It's about a culture that lets someone like my Moth-era woman who's worked harder and fought longer than anyone in this room disrespected because of the color of her skin. One of the executives, a man named Richard with gray hair and a tailored suit, cleared his throat. Mr. Jackson, with all due respect, we have policies in place to prevent this kind of thing. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Malcolm cut him off, his voice sharp but controlled. My mother was told to leave. She was threatened with security. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a failure. Your failure. Richard flushed, sinking back into his chair. Karen opened her mouth to speak, then closed it, her eyes darting to the table. Malcolm didn't let up. We're going to change how this bank operates, starting with mandatory training on bias and discrimination, starting with accountability for every employee, from tellers to executives, and starting with an apology to my mother. The room buzzed with murmurs, some supportive, others resistant. Karen finally spoke, her voice shaky. Mr. Jackson, I'm deeply sorry for what happened. I didn't mean to disrespect your mother. I was just following protocol. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. Protocol doesn't excuse prejudice. You saw an elderly black woman and made assumptions. That's not protocol. That's bias. Karen's face crumpled, but Malcolm didn't soften. He turned to the rest of the room. This bank is mine, but it's also yours. Every decision you make reflects on me, on my mother, on every customer who walks through our doors. If you can't handle that responsibility, you don't belong here. The meeting ended with a plan. Sensitivity training, a review of customer service policies, and a public statement addressing the incident. Malcolm knew it wasn't enough, but it was a start. He spent the rest of the day meeting with community leaders, listening to their concerns, and promising change. Clara joined him for some of those meetings, her presence a quiet force, her words cutting through excuses with the precision of a lifetime's experience. By the end of the week, the bank had issued a formal apology, not just to Clara but to all customers who had ever felt dismissed or disrespected. The statement went viral, sparking debates across X and news outlets. Some praised Malcolm's leadership, others called it a publicity stunt. Clara didn't care about the noise. She cared about the people who came up to her at church, at the grocery store, sharing their own stories of being judged, overlooked, or pushed aside. She listened, her heart heavy but hopeful. One evening, as Clara and Malcolm sat in her small living room, the TV flickering with news coverage of the bank incident, Clara turned to her son. "You did good, Malcolm," she said, her voice soft but proud. But this is just the beginning. People need to know they're not alone in this fight. Malcolm nodded, his eyes on the screen where a pundit was dissecting the bank's apology. I know, Mom. I'm not stopping here. Clara reached for his hand, her grip firm despite her age. It's not just about you fighting, son. It's about teaching others to stand up too. That's how we win. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Malcolm implemented the changes he'd promised, firing 2 employees who resisted the new policies and promoting a young black teller who had quietly supported Clara during the incident. The bank's reputation took a hit, but it also gained new customers, people who saw Malcolm's actions as a sign of hope, a signal that things could change. Clara, meanwhile, became a reluctant symbol. She didn't want the attention, but she didn't shy away from it either. She spoke at community events, her voice steady as she shared her story and urged others to demand respect. I'm not special, she'd say, her eyes fierce. I'm just a woman who's tired of being treated like less. And I know I'm not the only one. The bank incident faded from the headlines, but its impact lingered. Malcolm and Clara continued their work, not just in the bank but in the community, funding scholarships for black students and supporting local businesses owned by people of color. The fight was far from over, but they were in it together, a mother and son bound by love and a shared vision of justice. As the sun set one evening, Clara stood on her porch, watching the neighborhood kids play in the street. Malcolm joined her, a cup of coffee in hand. You think we made a difference, Mom? He asked, his voice quiet. Clara looked at him, her eyes warm but unflinching. We made a start, Malcolm. That's what matters. The rest is up to everyone else, those kids, their parents, even the people who watched it all happen and didn't say a word. They've got to decide what's right and what's worth fighting for. What do you think? Where does justice begin? And how do we confront the biases we see every day? Share your thoughts, because this story isn't just Clara's or Malcolm's, it's all of ours.